Welcome back, Truth Seeker. July 9th, 2019. CNN this morning had a headline up about how Bill Gates called Steve Jobs a wizard who cast spells. And this story was actually from this weekend. I missed it. Sunday, July 7th, Bill Gates went on CNN's Fareed Zakaria and told this story about how Steve Jobs had this magical ability to get Apple out of bad situations because he was a wizard who cast spells on people and made them believe in the company. And the reason I'm making this video is because last Tuesday, July 2nd, I had a conversation with Mark Passio, and I asked him what it was about the number 77. If you're not familiar with Mark Passio, he's been putting out work in the truth community for over a decade, and he is an admitted former Satanist. So he has knowledge of the occult. And if you've ever listened to him before, he explains why that was the lowest point in his life. And by being a member of that, it's what put him on the path of truth and essentially trying to right his wrongs. But because he comes from this background, I knew he'd be the person to ask more about these numbers and why the elite use them. So I asked him last Tuesday of all days. It's funny, I see this headline exactly 7 days later, but I asked him last Tuesday, what is it about 77? And he got a grin and he said, oh, that's easy. He said, that's the number of the wizard. That's the number of the sorcerer. That's the number of the spellcaster. I said, okay, that makes some sense to me. And now think about this. Sunday, which was July 7th, you have Bill Gates on CNN talking about how Steve Jobs was a wizard. So, take a look at this. Steve Jobs was born Stephen. And of course, Stephen equals 77. But when you think wizards, you got to think of the Wizard of Oz, right? And we've definitely talked about this before. The Wizard of Oz and Gematria sums to 77, just like United States. And on one of my older channels, which has been deleted, I used to have an hour-long video on the film The Wizard of Oz and all the encoded messages in that and all the parallels with the United States and the reality of this nation we live in. But yeah, it makes perfect sense. The wizard, spellcasting. And when he said that to me, I went back to September 11th. Because here's what's always stood out about September 11th. The Pentagon, which Flight 77 hit, is 77 feet and 3.5 inches tall. So 77 feet being the main feature. Plus, the Pentagon's in Washington, D.C. on the 77th meridian. And the official story is that Flight 77 departed at 8:20 a.m. and crashed into the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m., which is exactly 77 minutes later. And long before I knew about Gematria, I used to look at these things and say, that seems to be quite the numerical ritual. That's a lot of 77. And lo and behold, you learn Gematria and you realize September 11th equals 77. World Trade Center equals 77. United States is 77. Secret Society is 77. Power 77. And in light of Flight 77 hitting the Pentagon on September 11th, don't forget Pentagon construction began September 11th. Something else I used to look at and and ha about. Think about the English language and how we use the word spell. We use it for magical purposes and also in terms of how we construct words, spelling. And this practice of coding numbers into words comes from Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, where there's a part of it known as the Klippoth, which is about casting spells and spells that are meant to harm people. And that's the way I felt after September 11th. I used to explain it to people who were somewhat awake who'd listen about September 11th. I'd say, doesn't it seem like there's a magical spell over the people that keeps them from seeing the obvious about September 11th? That the buildings were clearly demolished, that they were turned to rubble, that a man in a cave couldn't possibly orchestrate such an attack against a nation that spends countless dollars on defense, Plus, there were some other things that seemed to have the people in a spell, like not seeing through the sitting president at the time, who was the son of the last Republican president, who in the election he supposedly won, where it was first called in the other candidate's favor, and ended up coming down to the state where his brother was the governor, Florida, Jeb, George, and George. But it's just interesting, They say if you don't ask, you won't find. And I find it so strange that it was exactly last Tuesday. Here, I'll just show you the CNN page. It was last Tuesday that, Ross Perot died. And the headline this morning was that another billionaire just entered the political race. Now we have a dead billionaire who ran for president. Okay, I'm going to have to look into that. But this morning I saw that in the News and Buzz, CNN promoted this story to the top. So that's what I caught when I said, let me look at this. And then I read the article. I said, wow. Sunday on 7/7, Gates called Steve Jobs a wizard. It's funny. Just last Tuesday, I had Mark Passio telling me about how 77's the number of the wizard. So, and Arkadelphia is coming up, September 13th through the 15th. Mark Passio and I should be on stage together. And I'm going to be presenting this information, and I've asked if he'd be at my side to give his analysis of the numbers and why these certain numbers are used. And I think that's going to be really meaningful. If you can't attend the event, I'll be sure to get the information to you one way or the next. But, he's got the experience and knowledge that most of us don't have. So I am looking forward to that. And I think it's going to shed more light on why these certain numbers are used ritualistically again and again. And the only number I asked him about was 77, really. So, but it only took 1 week to find further proof that what he said was true. And had I seen the story this past Sunday, it would have only taken 5 days. All right, Truth Seeker. Until next time.